Sarah Winters stood near the corner table, her chest heaving, her amber eyes locked on the small boy slumped over a plate of barely touched venison. "This boy needs emergency help right now." The words ripped from her throat with an urgency that made every wolf in the dining hall freeze. Alpha King Cade Mercer rose halfway from his seat, his silver eyes flashing with dominance. "What did you say?" "I said," Sarah repeated, slower but no less forceful, "your son needs emergency help. Now." "No." The word came out as a growl. Caleb Mercer was 5 years old, pale and fine-boned for a pup, dressed in a tiny suit like a miniature version of the Alpha sitting across from him. He had been quiet all morning, staring at the blood-rare meat on his plate with glassy eyes. At first, Sarah thought he was simply subdued in his father's intimidating presence, but then she saw it, the tremor in his left hand as he reached for his water. The way the cup tilted dangerously. The droop at the corner of his mouth when he tried to smile at her. She'd noticed it 20 minutes ago while clearing plates from the neighboring table. No one else had. The father, the Alpha King himself, was too busy on his phone, barking orders about territory disputes and pack alliances through his Bluetooth. Caleb had dropped his fork twice, and Sarah had knelt to retrieve it with a warm smile. That's when she saw how his left arm didn't lift quite right. Something inside her clenched. She'd seen this before. Years ago, when her brother Malik had collapsed during a shift attempt. The pack healer said he was just weak, that some Omegas couldn't handle the transformation. By the time anyone realized it was something worse, a clot pressing against his brain, he was gone. Now, here it was again. Different bloodline, same signs. "Sweetheart," she said gently, crouching down beside Caleb's chair. "Are you feeling dizzy? Does your wolf feel strange?" Caleb blinked at her, confused. His voice came out thick and slurred. "My head hurts. And I can't feel Shadow." Shadow. His wolf. Every child began sensing their wolf by age 4, even if they couldn't shift yet. For him not to feel his wolf at all. Before Sarah could react, Caleb's small body wobbled. His fork slipped from his fingers. He swayed, and then his right hand shot to his temple. Sarah's instincts took over. She dropped the tray she was carrying and lunged forward, catching the boy just as his chair tipped. "Easy, baby. I've got you," she said, holding his shoulders to keep him upright. The Alpha King turned, startled. Shock flashed to fury in an instant. "What the hell are you doing?" "Sir, your son, he's in trouble," she said urgently. "He can't feel his arm. His speech is slurring. He can't sense his wolf. He needs a healer. Now." Cade Mercer was already on his feet, raw dominance rolling off him in waves that would have sent any other Omega to their knees. He pulled Caleb from her grasp with more strength than necessary. The edge of his silver cuff bracelet, a symbol of his rank, clipped Sarah's cheekbone. Pain burst white behind her eyes, but she didn't move away. "Please," she gasped, tasting blood. "He's having a neurological emergency. His wolf is retreating. That's not normal." The boy leaned into his father's chest, blinking slowly, his left side completely limp. "He's fine," Cade said, tone clipped and cold. "He's just tired. The full moon exhausted him." Sarah shook her head. "Sir, I don't mean to overstep, but I've seen this before. Please, he's showing signs of a stroke. Even young wolves can have them, especially if theirs." "You're just an Omega maid," Cade cut her off, his eyes sharp and skeptical, fixed on her like a predator assessing prey. "Who gave you the right to diagnose my son?" The word struck harder than the physical blow. Sarah opened her mouth, but something caught in her throat. She wasn't surprised. She'd heard variations of that phrase before, from pack leaders who thought rank mattered more than instinct. "I've worked in the pack infirmary," she said carefully. "I've studied healing. I've seen these symptoms before. The way his hand isn't gripping, the left side of his face not moving, his wolf retreating inward, that's not exhaustion. Cade's jaw tightened. His entire posture shifted. Shoulders squared, nostrils flaring as his wolf pushed closer to the surface. You don't know me. You don't know him. And I don't know who sent you. Sarah blinked. Excuse me? You think I don't know? His voice dropped to a dangerous rumble. Rival packs try to get to me through him. Omegas are easy to plant, easy to manipulate. You walk over here, 'cause a scene, accuse me of neglecting my son. I'm not accusing you of anything, she said, voice cracking. I'm telling you he's in danger. Caleb whimpered softly against his father's shoulder. His left arm dangled uselessly. No one in the hall moved. The head of house finally rushed over, face red with panic. Alpha Mercer, I'm so deeply sorry. I have no idea what's gotten into her. He turned to Sarah, voice low but venomous. You just put your hands on the Alpha King's son. Are you insane? I didn't assault anyone, Sarah said, pressing a napkin to her bleeding cheek. The boy was falling. I caught him. Look at him. He needs help. But the head of house wasn't listening. His smile turned apologetic as he faced Kate again. Alpha, she's new to service. I promise this will be handled. Please accept our deepest apologies and your meals are complimentary, of course. Cade didn't look at Sarah. Keep your staff away from me. He strode toward the door, Caleb limp in his arms, his personal guards falling into formation around him. Sarah took a step after them, but the head of house grabbed her arm. Don't make this worse, he hissed. I'm trying to save his life, she said, voice shaking. Can't you see that? What I see, he snapped, is a low-rank Omega who doesn't know when to submit. You just embarrassed this entire pack in front of the Alpha King, a male who could buy our territory 10 times over. Sarah stared at him. You're apologizing to the man who struck me, not the woman bleeding in front of you. He looked away. Go home, Sarah. Take the week off. Without pay. She stood there for a long moment, her cheek throbbing, the taste of metal in her mouth. The massive oak doors swung shut behind the Alpha's entourage, and the hall slowly returned to its muted conversations, pretending she didn't exist. Sarah untied her apron slowly, folded it with trembling hands, and set it on the service counter. That little boy, she whispered to no one, might not make it through the night. The head of house said nothing. Outside, the mountain air was bright and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. Sarah leaned against the stone wall behind the mansion, her eyes burning. The world felt cruelly familiar. The disbelief. The dismissal. The quiet prejudice wrapped in politeness. Omegas were meant to serve, not to speak. She pulled out her phone and typed, pediatric stroke symptoms wolves. The results appeared. Same list. Same danger. One article specifically mentioned young wolves. When a wolf pup cannot sense their inner wolf, it may indicate severe neurological distress. Time is critical. Her thumb hovered over the emergency healer hotline. What could she even say? I'm a maid. A boy I don't know might be dying. But his father, the Alpha King, thinks I'm a threat. No one would listen. She closed her eyes, pressing her bruised cheek against the cool stone. Not again, she whispered. I won't let it happen again. Above her, a raven cawed somewhere in the forest. Slow and distant, like a warning. Sarah straightened, tucked her phone into her pocket, and started the long walk back to her small cabin on the edge of pack territory. Every step pulsed with the ache in her face. But underneath it, there was something stronger, resolve. She had seen the signs. She knew what they meant. And even if no one else believed her, she would find a way to make sure that little boy got help. Because she'd learned the hardest truth years ago in a healer's tent that smelled of herbs and grief. Sometimes the ones who see are the ones no one listens to. And sometimes, seeing is enough to save a life, if you refuse to look away. Chapter 2. Sarah's cabin was on the second floor of a weathered timber building at the edge of the Shadow Peak Pack's territory. The stairs creaked as she climbed, each step echoing in the empty hallway like a reminder of everything she wanted to forget. Her keys jangled in her shaking hands as she pushed the door open and stepped inside. She didn't turn on the lights. The afternoon sun bled in through the thin curtains, casting pale gold lines across the worn wooden floor. Sarah dropped her bag on the couch, sat down on the edge of the armrest, and let her body go still. For a moment, she simply breathed. Her cheek ached where the Alpha King's bracelet had struck her. She hadn't even looked in the mirror yet. Maybe she didn't want to see the damage. The physical wound felt less raw than the emotional one. Being accused of harming a child when all she'd tried to do was help. She could still feel the heat of Cade Mercer's stare, cold, suspicious, like she was the danger in the room. And the head of house apologizing to a man who could buy their entire territory while dismissing her like she was a pup who'd knocked over a glass of wine. Sarah closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the wall. Her fingers trembled in her lap. She hadn't cried. Not yet. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out slowly. One notification, a voicemail from Rosa, an elderly wolf who lived below her and had taken to treating her like a granddaughter ever since Sarah moved in 2 years ago. "Hi, honey," Rosa's warm, raspy voice filled the silence. "I saw you come in early today. Just checking if everything's all right. I left some stew by your door. Eat something, okay? You never come home this early unless something's wrong." Sarah smiled despite the lump in her throat. Rosa was 70 years old, a widow from the old pack lines, sharp as a blade and soft as fresh bread. She lived below Sarah and had become the closest thing to family she had left. Sarah stood, walked to the door, and sure enough, there it was. A ceramic container wrapped in foil with a note that simply read, "For strength." She carried it back inside but left it untouched on the small kitchen table. Instead, she moved to the bookshelf near the window and pulled down a photo frame. Her fingers brushed the glass, and her breath hitched. Malik smiled back at her from the picture. He was 12 in that photo, dressed in a makeshift costume made from cardboard and duct tape, a robot, holding up 2 bent arms like he was ready to take on the world. He hadn't made it to 13. Malik had collapsed during a supervised shift training session. The instructors thought he was being dramatic. Omegas were always weaker during their first shifts, they said. The pack healer said it was probably just exhaustion. By the time someone called for emergency transport to the regional healer's sanctuary, he was unresponsive. The healer said it was a stroke, something no one expected in a wolf so young, something no one believed until it was too late. Sarah had been 19. Halfway through her apprenticeship as a healer's assistant. After Malik's death, she never finished. The halls of the infirmary, once filled with purpose, became unbearable. She left her training, took up work to support her grieving mother, and never went back. But she never stopped noticing. Never stopped remembering the signs. And today, she had seen those signs again. Her hands curled into fists. She stood up abruptly and walked to the kitchen. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a red heart, was her old healer's apprentice certification. Expired now, but still a reminder of what she once knew, what she still knew. She grabbed her laptop and opened it on the counter. Search, signs of stroke in young wolves. The list appeared. Sudden numbness or weakness, especially on one side. Trouble speaking or understanding speech. Difficulty walking, dizziness, loss of balance. Facial drooping. Loss of connection to inner wolf. Check. 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 She clicked into a healing forum. A pack healer had posted a thread just days ago. Don't ignore subtle signs in pups. Even small symptoms matter. Parents often miss what strangers can see. Trust your instincts. Sarah sat back and stared at the screen. She thought of Caleb's glassy eyes, his slurred speech, his limp arm, and how his father had only glanced at him twice during the entire meal. Once to order his food. Once to silence his whining. She opened another tab and began typing a message. To whom it may concern. I witnessed a child today exhibiting symptoms consistent with pediatric stroke in wolves. I do not know the child's full name, but I believe his father is Alpha King Cade Mercer. But she stopped. What was she doing? Reporting to who? The Pack Council? The Regional Healers Guild? She had no proof, no connection, no authority, just a bruised cheek and a reputation already smeared by assumptions. She closed the laptop. No. There had to be a better way. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Sarah opened it cautiously. Rosa stood there, a scarf tied around her silver hair, concern etched into every wrinkle on her face. Can I come in? She asked gently. Sarah stepped aside. Rosa walked in, eyeing her with that grandmotherly X-ray vision that saw everything. Sweetheart, she said softly. What happened to your face? Sarah hesitated, then told her everything. The boy, the symptoms, the accusation, the dismissal. Rosa listened silently. When Sarah finished, Rosa walked over, placed a gnarled hand on her shoulder, and said, You did the right thing. But nobody believes me, Sarah whispered. I'm just, me. No, Rosa said firmly. You're the kind of wolf this world needs more of. You saw something no one else saw, and you acted. That takes guts. That takes heart. And believe me, girl, truth has a way of coming back around. Sarah swallowed hard. You think his father will listen? Rosa smiled sadly. Maybe not now. But if you're right, sweetheart, he'll have no choice. Sarah nodded slowly, the weight in her chest shifting, lighter, maybe, or just more focused. She didn't know how, but she would find a way to reach that boy. Somehow. She wasn't finished yet. She had carried this kind of pain before, and she'd carry it again if it meant saving someone else from it. Chapter 3. The penthouse suite atop Shadow Peak Mountain was a fortress of glass and silence. From his study window, Alpha King Cade Mercer could see the sweep of his territory below, the dense forests, the small town nestled in the valley, the distant glow of the Pack's commercial district. He stood there long after sunset, one hand on the window frame, the other wrapped around a glass of whiskey gone warm. Caleb was asleep in the next room. Cade could hear the soft rhythm of his son's breathing through the monitor, and beneath it, the faint, irregular pulse of the boy's wolf, weak, flickering, like a candle in the wind. The sound usually comforted him, but today it made his stomach twist. He hadn't slept much. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that Omega, Sarah, her face pale, her voice sharp and trembling. He's in danger. The words clung to him like burrs. Cade exhaled slowly. He had always hated chaos. His whole life had been about control, territory, alliances, pack law, bloodlines. He could predict how a rival alpha would move in negotiations within minutes. But he couldn't make sense of what had happened yesterday in that dining hall. It wasn't just the embarrassment, though that stung. It was the fear. The flash of panic he'd felt when Caleb had gone limp for that split second. He'd told himself it was exhaustion, low blood sugar, anything but something worse. Now he wasn't sure. He rubbed the back of his neck where tension had gathered like coiled wire. The mark on his wrist, where he'd grabbed Caleb too roughly, had already begun to darken into a bruise. Cade had built the Shadow Peak Pack from a struggling bloodline into the most powerful pack in the Northern Territories. His name appeared in council records alongside words like uncompromising and visionary. But beneath the polished surface was a wolf held together by duty and regret. He thought of his ex-mate, Elara, how she used to worry about Caleb's health. You don't look at him, Cade, she'd said once, packing her bags. You manage him like he's a future alpha to mold. Pups aren't portfolios. They're people. She'd been gone 3 years now, remated to an alpha in the Western Territories. The council had granted Cade full custody. He told himself it was what Caleb needed. Stability. Structure. A father who provided. But lately, Even he could feel the distance. Caleb's laughter had faded into politeness. The suite echoed too much. Cade turned away from the window and sat at his desk. The framed photograph of Caleb on his first day of school stared back at him. The boy in the picture was bright-eyed, confident. The child sleeping down the hall looked smaller. Thinner. A flicker of doubt pricked the edges of his mind. He pushed it away. A knock on the door broke the stillness. Alpha Mercer. It was Hannah, the house Omega. Caleb's awake. He says he doesn't want breakfast. Cade frowned. He always eats breakfast. Not today, Alpha. He said his head hurts. The words hit him harder than they should have. He stood up quickly. I'll check on him. Caleb was sitting in bed, holding a stuffed wolf with one arm. His left hand rested limply at his side. His eyes met Cade's with sleepy confusion. Hey, pup, Cade said, forcing a smile. You okay? My head feels weird, Caleb mumbled. And my arms heavy. Shadows, really quiet, Dad. Cade crouched beside the bed. Maybe you slept on it funny. No. Caleb tried to lift his left arm. It didn't move easily. He winced. Something icy crept through Cade's chest. He remembered the Omega again, Sarah. Her voice, the panic, the certainty. He's in trouble. Cade swallowed hard. We'll get you checked out, okay? Just to be safe. He called his personal healer immediately. Find the best neurological healer in the territory, he ordered. Now. But the earliest appointment available was 2 weeks away. The nearest specialized facility was an hour's flight. The local clinic receptionist said she could fit them in sometime next Thursday. Cade hung up, jaw tight. How could there be so few options? He considered calling a private healer from the capital, but Caleb needed rest first. He told himself it could wait until tomorrow. He didn't notice his son's left eyelid drooping slightly as he tucked him back into bed. Later that morning, Cade arrived at Shadow Peak Enterprises, the corporate arm of his Pax Investments. The sleek glass building hummed with quiet efficiency. Assistants whispered. Screens glowed. Cade walked through the lobby, nodding curtly at greetings. Rough morning, his beta, Marcus, asked, catching up beside him. Cade's lips twitched in something like a smile. My son wasn't feeling great. Probably just tired, Marcus chuckled. Pups bounce back fast. Cade nodded, but the words didn't land. He walked into his office, closed the door, and sat down. His reflection in the dark monitor looked older than 44. He typed into the search bar. Arm weakness in young wolves. Halfway down the list of results, his hand froze over the keyboard. The same phrase appeared again and again. Stroke in wolf pups. Neurological emergency. Seek immediate care. He stared at the screen until the words blurred. A knock came at the door. His assistant stepped in. Alpha, the Shadow Peak Gazette wants a comment about what happened at the mansion yesterday. They said someone posted online, an Omega claiming she tried to help your son, but you reacted badly. Cade's head snapped up. What? They said someone filmed part of the incident. It's going viral in Pack communities. Cade's pulse quickened. Who posted it? No name. Just a local account. He sank back in his chair. For a moment, shame burned hotter than anger. Tell them no comment, he said quietly. And make sure that Omega isn't harassed online. The assistant blinked. Of course, Alpha. When she left, Cade rubbed his temples. He couldn't shake the image of Sarah's face, fear, conviction, pain. She believed she was right. And maybe, God's help him, maybe she was. That night, he stood in the doorway of Caleb's room again. The boy was sleeping uneasily, his lips parted, his small chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. The lamp cast a soft circle of light across his pale cheek. Cade hesitated, then sat beside him. He brushed a hand through his son's dark hair. For the first time in months, he whispered, "I love you, pup." Caleb didn't stir. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Cade stayed there for a long time, his mind running through every territorial dispute he'd ever navigated, every pack challenge he'd ever won, searching for the one solution that mattered now. The one he might already be too late to find. Chapter 4. The Shadow Peak Pack Clinic on Oakwood Street looked more like a converted warehouse than a medical facility. Its gray stone facade and flickering neon "open" sign didn't inspire confidence. Inside, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and old paper, and the waiting room chairs creaked under the weight of worry. Sarah sat in one of those chairs, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She hadn't come as a patient. She wasn't there for herself. She was there for a boy whose name she barely knew, but whose face hadn't left her thoughts since yesterday. She approached the intake desk earlier that morning with rehearsed calm. "I'm here to speak to someone about a young wolf who may need medical help. I'm not a family member, but I witnessed concerning symptoms." The receptionist, a middle-aged she-wolf with tired eyes and a name tag that read Linda, looked up without much interest. "We don't accept reports from non-pack members or those outside the family unit. If you have concerns, you need to contact the family directly or the pack council." "I don't know his full address," Sarah admitted. "But I know his father, Alpha King Cade Mercer. The boy's name is Caleb. He's 5. I saw him at the mansion yesterday. He was showing signs of a stroke. I used to train as a healer. I know what I saw." Linda's expression didn't change. "If you're worried about abuse or neglect, I can give you a number to call. But without parental consent or pack authorization, we can't accept walk-in concerns." "I'm sorry." Sarah stood there, jaw clenched, trying not to let frustration boil over. "So what do I do? Wait for him to collapse again? What if next time no one's there?" Linda looked genuinely weary. "Honey, this system barely works for wolves with packs standing. I wish I had a better answer." And now Sarah sat in the corner, staring at the outdated health posters on the wall, reminders about proper shifting techniques, moon cycle preparations, and recognizing silver poisoning. The weight in her chest was heavier today. The bruise on her cheek had faded into a dull shadow, but the ache of helplessness felt rawer than ever. She pulled out her phone and scrolled again through her searches: moya disease in wolves, transient ischemic attacks in young shifters, pediatric stroke response time. Each one told the same story: time was everything. The swing of the door startled her. She looked up, and froze. Alpha King Cade Mercer stepped into the clinic. He wore dark jeans and a heavy jacket, the hood pulled up. Gone was the commanding presence from yesterday. His face was drawn, unshaven, eyes shadowed with something that looked like fear. He held Caleb's hand gently as the boy shuffled beside him, his steps uneven, like one side of his body was heavier than the other. Caleb's left arm hung limp. Sarah rose before she could stop herself. Cade turned and saw her. For a second, his expression was unreadable. Then recognition hit, and tension. "Sarah," he said cautiously, her name rough on his tongue. She ignored the curious stares from other wolves in the waiting room. "You brought him here." Cade nodded slowly. He said his head hurt again this morning. His arm isn't improving. And his wolf. He paused. Shadows barely responding. She exhaled, her shoulders sagging with something like relief. "You did the right thing. I'm not sure I did it fast enough." Silence lingered between them, thick, but not hostile. "I didn't mean to overstep yesterday," she said gently. "But I saw something no one else seemed to notice. I had to say something." Cade looked down at Caleb, then back at her. "You were right. I didn't see it. Or I didn't want to." Sarah crouched down in front of the boy. "Hi, sweetheart," she said softly. "You remember me?" Caleb gave a shy nod. You caught me when I fell. Yeah, I did. She smiled, though her heart ached at how pale he looked. The clinic attendant called out, Mercer? Cade looked up. That's us. He hesitated, then looked at Sarah. Would you mind waiting? She blinked. You want me to stay? He nodded, something vulnerable flickering in his silver eyes. Just in case I don't hear everything. Or understand it. Sarah felt her throat tighten. Of course. They disappeared into the back, and Sarah returned to her seat. Her hands still trembled slightly, but it was different now, less rage, more resolve. She had stepped into the fire, been burned, and walked back into it anyway. 40 minutes passed before Cade returned, Caleb quiet and curled into his father's arms. Cade looked older than he had that morning. They're referring us to Silverpine Medical Center in the city, he said, voice rough. The healer thinks it might be neurological. She mentioned something called moya moya. Sarah swallowed hard. It's rare. Dangerous. But it's treatable, especially if you catch it early. Cade nodded. They're calling for emergency transport. I offered to drive, but the healer insisted on a medical van. He looked down at his son again, and Sarah saw it, the weight of almost losing something precious pressing down on him like a physical force. I almost waited another day, he said quietly. You didn't, Sarah said firmly. That's what matters. He looked up at her, eyes full of something unfamiliar for an alpha king, humility. You saved him, he said. I don't know why I assumed the worst about you yesterday. You were scared, Sarah interrupted gently. And you're used to being in control. When someone challenges that, especially someone with no rank. She trailed off. It's not an excuse, Cade said. No, she agreed. But it's human. Or, wolf. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. The emergency transport arrived a few minutes later, a specialized medical van with pack healers on board. Cade hesitated at the door, then turned to Sarah again. Would you come with us? He asked. I could use someone who knows what she's talking about. Sarah blinked in surprise. You want me there? Yes. She nodded slowly. Let me grab my bag. As they stepped outside into the crisp mountain air, Sarah looked at the boy nestled in his father's arms. She didn't know what the next few hours would bring, but for the first time in years, she felt something stronger than anger or fear. She felt useful. And that, in its own quiet way, felt like healing. Chapter 5. The wail of the medical van's siren cut through the quiet mountain roads, a high-pitched scream that twisted through the forest like a warning to the spirits of the wild. Inside the back of the vehicle, Caleb lay strapped to a medical stretcher, a pediatric oxygen mask resting beneath his nose. His cheeks were pale, his left hand unmoving. The monitoring equipment beeped steadily beside him, not critical yet, but close enough to make every wolf in the van tense. Cade sat beside him, shoulders tight, elbows pressed into his knees. He looked like a wolf unraveling, his usual composure stripped away, replaced by something raw and desperate. His suit from yesterday had been replaced by a rumpled jacket and jeans. His eyes were rimmed red, not from exhaustion, but from something deeper, guilt. Across from him, Sarah sat quietly, watching the monitor, reading every flicker on the screen. She didn't speak unless necessary, but her presence alone carried a steadying force that Cade hadn't expected, or deserved. The pack healer leaned in, checking Caleb's vitals. He's stable. Blood pressure's on the low side, but not critical. We'll be at Silverpine Medical Center in 18 minutes. Cade barely nodded. He turned to Sarah, his voice hoarse. He was trying to tell me. Days ago. Maybe weeks. Sarah met his eyes but said nothing. He'd say he was tired, Cade continued, the words tumbling out like a confession. Said his head felt funny. I thought he wanted to skip training. To get out of lessons. I thought structure would help him. That if I just kept his days full, he wouldn't miss his mother. Sarah hesitated, then said gently, "You're not the first parent to miss the signs." "I'm not just a parent," Cade said bitterly. "I'm an alpha with resources. With access. I should have known better." Sarah studied him for a moment. "Maybe that's part of the problem." Cade looked at her, surprised. "You think power replaces perception," she said carefully. "You thought being in control meant you couldn't be blindsided. But sickness doesn't care how many territories you rule." Cade sat back, her words hitting closer than he wanted to admit. "And for what it's worth," she added more gently, "you listened today. That might make all the difference." Caleb stirred on the stretcher, his voice small and slurred. "Dad?" Cade leaned over immediately. "I'm right here, pup. My arm feels weird. Shadows, gone." "I know," Cade said, voice cracking. "We're going to get it fixed, okay? We're going to the best healers in the territory. They'll help Shadow come back." Caleb tried to smile, but only the right side of his face moved. The asymmetry tore at Cade's chest like claws. Sarah watched the exchange quietly, but every movement of the child triggered memories. Malik's eyes when he realized he couldn't feel his wolf anymore. His confusion. The pack healers who brushed it off until it was too late. She blinked hard and forced herself into the present. "Has Caleb had headaches before?" she asked Cade gently. Cade nodded. Sometimes he'd say it hurt behind his eyes. Or that his neck was stiff. "But I chalked it up to too much screen time, not enough sleep. You know, normal pup stuff." She nodded. "Moya Moya is sneaky. It mimics other things. Most healers won't even test for it unless someone pushes. So I need to push," Cade said. "Hard," Sarah confirmed. Cade absorbed this, the weight of responsibility falling heavier with every mile. The van took a wide curve, and through the back windows, Silver Pine Medical Center appeared, a sprawling complex of stone and glass perched on a hillside overlooking the city. Smoke rose from the ritual fires kept burning at each corner, a tradition to honor the moon goddess and guide healing energy. Sarah exhaled slowly. This place saved lives during the plague outbreak 5 years ago. The neuro team is solid. If there's a chance, it's here. As they pulled into the emergency bay, a team of healers and a pediatric neurologist awaited them, white coats, clipboards, expressions tight with focus. Cade climbed out first, holding Caleb's small hand as the stretcher rolled out. Sarah stepped aside but followed closely. "Alpha Mercer," the lead healer said, shaking Cade's hand quickly. "I'm Dr. Patricia Reeves. We'll start with a CT scan and MRI, check blood flow, assess the brain, and run full labs immediately. Do you have recent medical records for Caleb?" Cade nodded, pulling out his phone. "I'll send everything now." Dr. Reeves turned to Sarah. "And you are?" "She's the reason we're here," Cade said quietly. "She saw what I didn't." Dr. Reeves gave Sarah a quick, respectful nod. "Then thank you. You might have saved this boy's life." They disappeared down the hallway with Caleb, leaving Cade and Sarah in a quiet waiting room painted in soft blues and greens, colors meant to calm the terrified. Cade sank into one of the chairs, elbows on knees again, head in his hands. Sarah sat beside him, both of them staring at the door where Caleb had gone. "You don't have to stay," he murmured after a moment. "I know," she replied. Another long pause. "You said you've seen this before," Cade said softly. Sarah swallowed, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "My brother. Malik. He was 12. He collapsed during shift training. They thought it was weakness. Omegas sometimes struggle with their first shifts. By the time they realized it wasn't, he was gone." Cade turned his head slowly. "I'm sorry. I was training to be a healer when it happened," Sarah continued. "After he died, I couldn't finish. I couldn't walk into another clinic without seeing him on every table." Cade nodded slowly. "And yet, here you are. Yeah, Sarah said, a sad smile touching her lips. Here I am. The door swung open. Dr. Reeves returned, removing her gloves. Her expression was calm but firm. Alpha Mercer, she said. Caleb's scans show narrowing of the cerebral arteries consistent with moyamoya disease. He's at high risk for another, more serious stroke. We need to act fast. Cade stood slowly, his wolf rising to the surface, eyes flashing silver. What do you need from me? Consent for a cerebral revascularization procedure. It's complex, but our team is ready. We need to restore blood flow to prevent further damage, and to help his wolf reconnect. Cade didn't hesitate. Do it. Dr. Reeves nodded and disappeared again. Cade dropped back into the chair, head in his hands. I could have lost him, he whispered. You didn't, Sarah said firmly. You still have time. They sat in silence, two strangers bound by a child's fragile heartbeat and the razor-thin line between too late and just in time. Outside, clouds gathered over the mountains, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, low and mournful, like a prayer to the moon goddess. Cade closed his eyes and whispered words he hadn't spoken in 20 years. Moon goddess, if you're listening, don't take him from me. Chapter 6. The waiting room outside pediatric surgery was designed to feel like a place of comfort, muted earth tones, wooden animal carvings suspended from the ceiling, a children's bookshelf in the corner filled with stories about brave little wolves and moon magic. But no amount of careful design could soften the antiseptic bite of anxiety in the air. Cade sat forward on the edge of his chair, fingers laced so tightly together they trembled from the pressure. His phone sat untouched beside him. The device that once commanded his constant attention now seemed irrelevant. The Alpha King who never looked away from a screen hadn't checked a single message in over 2 hours. Across from him, Sarah sipped slowly from a paper cup of vending machine coffee. It tasted burnt, metallic. She didn't care. Every 10 minutes, Cade would glance toward the surgical wing's double doors. Each time they remained closed. She said it would take a few hours, Sarah reminded him gently. Cade nodded, but his foot tapped relentlessly against the floor. I know. I just. He trailed off, eyes rimmed red. I was so sure I had more time, he finally said. That he was just tired. Maybe going through a growth spurt. Young wolves stumble. They drop things. I didn't think it could be this. Sarah let his silence fill the room. She knew he needed to speak, to confess. He was trying to tell me, Cade whispered. Every day. And I just kept saying, you're fine. I even told him not to exaggerate. His voice cracked. What kind of father does that? Sarah leaned forward. You're not the only parent who's made that mistake. No, Cade said bitterly. But other parents don't have the kind of resources I do. I had every connection, every healer in the territory at my disposal. And still. I didn't see. Sarah looked at him for a moment, then said carefully, we don't see what we're not taught to look for. You were taught to fight rival alphas, to negotiate territory disputes, to protect your pack from external threats. But children don't follow the rules of engagement. They whisper warnings instead of shouting them. He looked up at her, something raw in his silver eyes. If you're not quiet enough to listen, she continued softly, you miss everything that matters. You heard him, Cade said. I did. The doors opened suddenly, and both of them stood. A nurse stepped into view, her expression calm. Alpha Mercer, Dr. Reeves will be out shortly. Your son is in recovery. The procedure went well. Cade staggered back into his seat, his face crumbling. He ran a hand down it like he was wiping away years of tension. Thank the goddess, he breathed. Thank the goddess. The nurse nodded and left again. Cade exhaled shakily and looked over at Sarah. You prayed? She smiled faintly. Not out loud. He chuckled, just barely. Me neither. Not since I was young. There was a long pause before he added, I thought if I just provided enough, kept everything running smoothly, I could shield him from pain. From loss. Money doesn't patch cracks, Sarah said gently. It just hides them. Cade let out a dry laugh. You should trademark that. She smiled. Maybe I will. 20 minutes later, Dr. Reeves came through the doors, removing her surgical cap. Her expression was calm, but her steps carried the weight of the last few hours. Alpha Mercer, she began, the revascularization procedure was successful. We were able to redirect blood flow using a donor artery. Caleb will be monitored closely for swelling or clotting, but for now, he's stable. Cade's throat tightened. Can I see him? In a few minutes. He's coming out of anesthesia. Be gentle when you talk to him, his speech may be slower, and movement on his left side will take time to return. But he's awake. And he's asking for his dad. Sarah smiled, her chest loosening. Cade's knees nearly buckled from relief. I want to thank you again, Dr. Reeves said, turning to Sarah. Without your intervention, we'd be having a very different conversation right now. She's not just an Omega, Cade said quietly. She's the reason I still have my son. Sarah looked away, suddenly overwhelmed. 20 minutes later, they stood at the threshold of Caleb's room. The small boy lay in a hospital bed, and 4 in one arm, monitors quietly beeping beside him. His skin looked fragile under the harsh lighting, but his eyes were awake. Cade walked in slowly, his heart in his throat. Hey, pup. Caleb blinked, his right hand twitching. Dad. Cade reached for him, sat carefully on the edge of the bed. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Caleb's voice was slurred but clear. I was scared. You didn't see me. Cade felt those words like silver through his chest. He nodded, eyes wet. I know, pup. But I see you now. I promise I'll never stop seeing you again. Caleb's tiny hand reached out, resting on his father's knee. Sarah stood in the doorway, unnoticed, watching them. Her heart ached with relief and memory, relief that this boy would live, memory of the brother who hadn't. Cade turned, saw her, and gestured for her to come closer. Caleb looked at her, his lips curving into a half-smile. Hi, Miss Sarah. Hey, sweetheart, she said softly, stepping forward. You're one tough kid. Did you tell my dad? I did. Caleb gave a small nod, satisfied. Thank you. Sarah's throat closed. She nodded, unable to speak. Cade stood, facing her. His voice dropped low, meant only for her. I owe you more than I can say. She didn't answer, not yet. Because in that moment, the only thing that mattered was the boy in the bed, his eyes open, his father's hand in his, and the second chance breathing between them. Chapter 7. The halls of Silverpine Medical Center were quieter after midnight. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows across the vinyl floors. In room 409B, the machines monitoring Caleb's vitals pulsed in a steady rhythm, gentle beeps and blinking green lights offering a strange sense of peace. Cade sat in the reclining chair next to the bed, his body slouched but his eyes wide open. Sleep was impossible. Every time he let his lids fall, he saw flashes, Caleb's crooked smile, the way his small hand couldn't grip the fork, the blank look in his eyes when Cade had told him to stop complaining. Now, his son was lying here in a pediatric ICU with stitches along his scalp and bandages around his head. And Cade couldn't stop wondering, what if Sarah hadn't been there? What if I had pulled him away faster? What if? He glanced over at the opposite corner. Sarah had dozed off in the second visitor chair, arms folded, head tilted slightly to one side. Her shoes were off, her feet tucked beneath her, and a thin hospital blanket draped over her shoulders. Cade had offered to arrange a hotel room for her, transportation home, anything. She'd refused. I'll stay till morning, she'd said. If that's okay. He hadn't had the words to argue. Now, in the hush of early morning, Cade watched her sleep. There was something disarming about her, something he hadn't encountered in people in a long time. Not just conviction, but a kind of quiet defiance. She didn't flinch when challenged. Didn't beg to be believed. She simply stood her ground, even when it meant being pushed, bled, dismissed. He rubbed his hands together, suddenly restless. Standing, he paced quietly to the window, looking out over the parking lot below. Street lamps cast halos on the wet asphalt, and the world outside seemed both distant and indifferent. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Marcus, his beta. Marcus, Shadow Peak Gazette is still requesting comment. Social media is exploding. The diner incident is trending across 3 territories now. Hashtag Omega Voice is picking it up. Cade sighed. He had ignored the storm brewing online, but it was there, angry tweets, op-eds, speculation. Someone had filmed part of the encounter at the mansion. It had gone viral. A wealthy alpha yanking his child from an Omega's hands. Accusations flying. A she-wolf bleeding and dismissed. He hadn't watched the video yet. He wasn't ready. He slid the phone back into his pocket. Behind him, Sarah stirred. "You don't sleep much, do you?" she asked groggily. Cade turned. "Neither do you, apparently." She sat up, blinking against the harsh light. Hospital chairs don't exactly make it easy. He offered her a fresh cup of coffee from the small pot in the corner. "It's terrible," he warned. She took it anyway. "Thanks." They sat in silence for a moment, sipping coffee that neither of them enjoyed, both trying to ignore the weight of everything hanging in the room. "Do you remember the exact moment you knew?" Cade finally asked. Sarah nodded slowly. When he tried to pick up his cup with his right hand, but his left just hung there. That, and the way his face moved when he smiled, it was like he was trying to convince everyone he was okay, but half of him didn't believe it. Cade swallowed hard. He was trying to be strong. "For me." "I know that look," Sarah said, her voice quiet. "It's the face pups wear when they're afraid of disappointing someone they love." He nodded, looking away. "You've been pushing him," she added carefully. "Haven't you?" Cade hesitated. Training sessions. Strategy lessons. Etiquette for future leadership. "I thought structure would help. That if I just kept his days full, he wouldn't miss his mother so much." Sarah tilted her head. "And what about you?" He looked at her, surprised. "What about me?" "You lost someone too." He exhaled sharply. Elara left 3 years ago. She remated last fall. Caleb's still trying to understand why she doesn't call much anymore. Sarah said nothing, but her silence was heavy with understanding. "I thought if I just provided enough," Cade continued, "kept everything running smoothly, I could shield him from pain. From abandonment. Money doesn't patch those kinds of wounds," Sarah said gently. "It just covers them." Cade let out a dry laugh. "You really should trademark that line." She smiled faintly. The door creaked open, and a nurse peeked in. "He's waking up." They both stood immediately. Caleb blinked slowly as they approached, his face pale and groggy. One side of his mouth twitched into a sleepy grin. "Dad." "Miss Sarah." Cade's chest nearly caved in from the sound of his voice. "I had a dream," Caleb murmured. "You were both there. You were talking, nice." Cade knelt beside the bed, his wolf rising protectively. "We are talking nice, pup. We're right here." Caleb looked at Sarah. "Did you stay all night?" "I did." "Why?" She smiled softly. "Because you're worth staying for." Caleb blinked, processing that. "Even though I'm sick." Cade's throat tightened. Sarah reached over and gently took the boy's right hand. "Especially because you're sick. And brave. And smarter than most grown wolves I know." Caleb nodded sleepily, content with that answer. Cade watched them both, his son and the Omega who had changed everything. Not just the medical emergency, but the way he saw his own life. He had built an empire by seeing threats before others did, by predicting rival moves, by staying 3 steps ahead. But this woman, this Omega with no rank, no title, had seen what he couldn't. And now, because of her, his son had a second chance. He would never let himself forget that. Chapter 8. The following Sunday morning, sunlight broke through the windows of Cade's penthouse suite, not with the cold indifference it usually carried, but with something warmer, softer, as if the light itself was asking permission to stay. Cade stood in the kitchen, barefoot, wearing sweatpants and a faded t-shirt. He'd never cooked breakfast before in his life, until last week. Before then, his idea of breakfast with Caleb involved catered meals delivered by staff or quick stops at cafes on the way to meetings. Today was different. "Can I help stir?" Caleb's voice echoed from behind him, a little weaker than it had been months ago, but clearer than it had been in weeks. Cade turned, smiling. "You bet, pup." Caleb shuffled toward the counter, his left leg still dragging slightly. The physical therapist's tape was visible beneath the hem of his pajama pants. His left arm hung closer to his side now, slightly lifted. Progress. Not a miracle, but progress. And Shadow, his wolf, was whispering again. Faint, but present. Cade handed him a wooden spoon, guiding his right hand. "Nice and easy. We don't want pancake batter on the ceiling." Caleb giggled. "Then don't cook like Dad usually does." Cade laughed, a sound that Sarah, when she arrived later, would say she'd never heard from him in any of their previous conversations. The doorbell buzzed at exactly 9 a.m. Cade wiped his hands and walked to open it. Sarah stood there with a brown paper bag, her dark hair in a neat twist, wearing jeans and a simple green sweater. "Still don't trust your pancake recipe?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "I trust it," Cade said, stepping aside to let her in. But Caleb insisted we needed the special honey butter from the bakery on Main Street. Sarah grinned. Smart kid. Inside, the kitchen smelled like butter and vanilla. Caleb waved from the breakfast nook, a spatula in one hand like a scepter. "Hey, Miss Sarah." "Hi, Chef Caleb," she replied warmly. "How's the left hand today?" "Still sleepy," he said with a shrug. "But Miss Tara says I'll get stronger. And Shadow's talking to me again. He's quiet, but he's there." Sarah's heart squeezed. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." Cade set out 3 plates, something he'd started doing without thinking. Setting a place for Sarah when she visited. She'd become a fixture in their Sundays, and neither of them questioned it anymore. Over breakfast, they talked about everything but hospitals. Caleb told Sarah about his new tutor, who let him learn about wolf history through stories instead of boring textbooks. Cade listened quietly, occasionally jumping in to clarify or correct, though more often now, he just let Caleb speak. The boy was healing. Not just physically, but emotionally. His confidence was returning, slow and steady. Halfway through the meal, Cade said, "Caleb's school is doing a presentation next weekend. He's been chosen to speak about courage." Sarah's eyes lit up. "No kidding?" Caleb nodded, blushing. "I have to talk about what courage means. And I get to tell my story. About being sick and getting better." "You're going to crush it," Sarah said. Cade cleared his throat. "We were wondering if you'd like to come." Sarah blinked. "Me?" "Yeah," Caleb said. "You're kind of part of our pack now." The word hung in the air, pack. Not just team. Not just friends. Pack. Sarah smiled, something warm creeping into her chest. "Then I'll be there." After breakfast, Caleb headed to his room for his physical therapy exercises. That left Cade and Sarah alone in the kitchen. He began gathering dishes. "Let me help," Sarah offered. He looked over at her. You've helped enough. She paused, drying her hands. You still think that? Cade set down the plate he was holding. No. I think I didn't say thank you properly. And I don't think I ever could. Sarah met his gaze. It wasn't about being thanked. I know, he said quietly. But it still matters. He leaned against the counter, voice dropping. You changed everything, Sarah. You changed how I see him. How I see myself. I didn't realize how far I'd drifted until you stood in front of me that day. She looked down. You were trying your best. Sometimes your best isn't enough, he said. She studied him. And sometimes it is, when you're willing to grow. The silence between them now wasn't awkward or heavy, but full. Complete. Cade broke it with a breath. I've been thinking about stepping back from some of my alpha duties. Delegating more to Marcus. Being more present for Caleb. Sarah nodded. He doesn't need an alpha king. He needs a father. Cade chuckled. You've got a gift for calling things exactly as they are. I've had practice. He looked at her, silver eyes steady. Seriously. Would it be crazy if I said I want to keep you in our lives? Not just as the Omega who saved my son, but someone I trust. Someone Caleb trusts. Sarah hesitated, then said carefully, it wouldn't be crazy. But it might get complicated. He smiled. Good. Complicated usually means something's real. She smiled back. We'll see where it goes. As she left later that morning, Cade stood at the door, watching her walk toward her car. Caleb peeked from behind the wall. She's nice. She is, Cade agreed. Do you like her? Cade smiled. I do. Good, Caleb said. I think we need more nice wolves around. And Dad? Yeah, pup. Shadow says she smells like home. Cade froze. Wolves didn't say things like that lightly. A wolf recognizing someone as home meant something deeper, something primal. Something like a mate bond beginning to form. Cade watched Sarah drive away, the sun now fully shining over the mountains, brighter somehow than it had been in a long time. And for the first time in years, his wolf stirred with something other than duty. It stirred with hope. Chapter 9. By midweek, the quiet warmth of Sunday had been swallowed by the cold sharpness of reality. Alpha King Cade Mercer's name was back in headlines, this time, not for a territory expansion, a pack alliance, or a business deal. This time, the coverage came with blurry screenshots, forum threads, and morning news segments discussing that mansion incident. The video had resurfaced, but now someone had paired it with a side-by-side update. Alpha King drags son away from Omega Healer, later credits her for saving his life. News panels were split down the middle. Half praised Sarah for her courage and composure. The other half dissected Cade's initial reaction with biting scrutiny. Social media was even worse. Some called it a redemption arc. Others called it damage control. And somewhere in the chaos, Sarah Williams' name was dragged into a storm she never asked for. She was walking home from the community center that Wednesday afternoon when her phone buzzed for the third time that hour. A news outlet. Another podcast producer. Even someone from a publisher's office. She ignored them all. When she reached her building, old Mr. Daniels, a gray-haired wolf who usually minded his own business, stepped into the hallway. Sarah, he said softly. That news clip. It's everywhere. She braced herself. I know. You all right? She hesitated, then nodded. Getting there. He gave a grunt. If anyone shows up at your door with a camera, they'll have to get past me first. She smiled. Thanks, Mr. Daniels. Back in her apartment, she stared at her cracked phone screen. One voicemail stood out among the noise, from Cade. Sarah, I know this is probably overwhelming. I didn't expect this either. I'm trying to shield Caleb from it all, but I just want to say again, I'm sorry. For what I did that day. For what this has become. You don't owe me a response. I just hope you're okay. She listened twice before deleting it. Meanwhile, Cade stood in the hallway outside his own office at Shadow Peak Enterprises, one floor below the executive suite, staring through the floor-to-ceiling glass into a boardroom full of restless wolves in suits. He wasn't there for the meeting. He had bigger things to worry about now. Alpha, his assistant Abby whispered, catching up to him. PR says we need a statement. I'm not giving a statement to the press, Cade said. But draft a letter. To Sarah. Not for the media, for her. Abby blinked. And what should I say? Cade looked out at the skyline. Tell the truth. That I judged her without listening. That my son is alive because she stood her ground when I didn't deserve it. That I'm not trying to spin a narrative, I'm just trying to be a better wolf. A better father. That evening, Sarah returned to her part-time shift at a local diner, not the mansion, but a small Pac-owned establishment where she'd been working since the incident. The regulars greeted her like family. Got your usual table ready, honey, called Mara, the 60-year-old server with a laugh like thunder. A few customers clapped when Sarah tied her apron on. But there were stares too. A couple whispered near the back booth. A man with a laptop snapped a photo before pretending he didn't. Still, she worked her station. It was near closing when the door chimed. And there he was. Alpha King Cade Mercer, in jeans and a flannel shirt, holding Caleb's hand. The diner went silent. Sarah stood at the counter, suddenly unsure how to breathe. Cade approached slowly. We didn't come to make a scene. I just thought, maybe it was time I learned how to order dinner like a regular wolf. Caleb beamed. I want the chicken tenders. With extra fries. Mara, somewhere behind Sarah, let out a delighted snort. Well, sit yourselves down, gentlemen. We got plenty of room. Cade looked at Sarah. If that's okay with you. Sarah gave a slow nod. Yeah. It's okay. Later, as she brought out their order, extra fries, no ketchup, just like Caleb liked, Cade looked up at her. I saw the comments online. I saw what people are saying about you. Sarah placed the plate gently in front of Caleb. They don't know me. Cade shook his head. They know your strength. But they don't know your story. They don't know what it cost you to stand there that day and not walk away, even when you were bleeding. Sarah didn't reply. He added quietly, I want to fix this. Not with a donation or an article. But with time. With presence. I want to show Caleb that admitting you were wrong can be the beginning, not the end. Sarah tilted her head, studying him. That's a good start. A long silence. Then Caleb, with a mouthful of chicken, said, Miss Sarah, are you coming to my presentation? And the pack gathering after? She grinned. You throwing a pack gathering too? He nodded enthusiastically. Dad said I could invite my favorite wolves. Cade looked at her, waiting. Sarah exhaled, something warm creeping into her chest. Then I guess I'll have to come. Caleb pumped his fist. Yes. The diner buzzed again with quiet chatter, the tension dissolving as food disappeared from plates and laughter returned to the room. It wasn't redemption. Not yet. But it was something. A start. Chapter 10. Saturday arrived with a soft drizzle that clung to the mountain roads, turning them slick and making the autumn leaves stick to the pavement like scattered memories. The kind of weather that made wolves cancel plans, or, in Cade Mercer's case, reschedule important pack business. But nothing was going to keep him from the elementary school auditorium that day. He adjusted Caleb's small tie with careful fingers, crouching to meet his son's eye. Remember, Cade said, smoothing the collar. Just speak clearly. From the heart. And if I get nervous, I find Miss Sarah, Caleb said confidently. Cade chuckled. Or maybe me. Caleb thought for a second, then smiled. Yeah. You too. Cade stood, turning towards Sarah, who stood a few feet away in the hallway adjusting a scarf around her neck. She looked beautiful in a simple forest green dress and dark jacket, casual, but elegant in a way that wasn't trying to impress anyone. Thank you, Cade said low enough that Caleb wouldn't hear. For coming. For everything. Sarah nodded, eyes scanning the children and parents rushing through the hallway. I wouldn't miss it. Inside the auditorium, parents shuffled to find seats. Pack members of all ranks filled the room, alphas, betas, and even other omegas, though Sarah noticed the way some of them looked at her. Curiosity. Respect. And from a few, resentment. She ignored them. Cade joined her near the third row, carrying 2 programs and a bottle of water for Caleb's post-presentation celebration. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room. Then, from behind the curtain, a single spotlight illuminated center stage. And there stood Caleb, holding his notes with both hands, his left hand still weaker, but present. His posture was straight, his knees wobbling only slightly. Good afternoon, he said, voice echoing through the auditorium. My name is Caleb Mercer. And I want to talk about courage. A collective "ah" rippled through the crowd. Sarah held her breath. Courage isn't about being the strongest wolf, Caleb continued, reading carefully from his notes. It's about being scared, and doing the right thing anyway. Cade leaned forward, elbows on his knees, a proud smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I got really sick, Caleb said, his voice steady now. I couldn't feel my wolf. I couldn't move my arm. And I was scared. The room was utterly silent. But someone saw me. Even when no one else did. He looked out toward the third row, his eyes finding Sarah. Miss Sarah didn't have to help me. But she did. Even when people were mad at her. Even when she got hurt. Sarah blinked hard, her vision blurring. That's courage, Caleb said. Helping someone even when it's hard. Even when people say you're wrong. He paused, then added, and my dad showed courage too. Because he listened. Even when it was hard to admit he was wrong. Cade's throat tightened. So if I ever get to be a leader like my dad, Caleb finished, I want to remember that courage isn't about being perfect. It's about saying sorry. And doing better. The room erupted in applause, fierce, genuine, and long. Cade was on his feet immediately. Sarah stood with him, both of them clapping as Caleb took his bow, his face pink with pride. After the presentation, parents and children flooded the hallway. Camera flashes went off. Caleb was surrounded by classmates congratulating him. Sarah stood to the side, watching, when Caleb broke free and ran toward her. Did you like it? He asked breathlessly. I loved it, Sarah said, crouching down to hug him. I meant what I said, Caleb added. About the courage thing. Her chest ached. I know you did, sweetheart. Cade joined them, pride radiating from him. You were incredible, pup. You carried the whole presentation. Caleb turned to Sarah again. Miss Sarah, can you come to the pack gathering? Please. She looked at Cade, who nodded. We'd both like you there. Sarah smiled. Then I'll be there. Chapter 11. Later that afternoon, the 3 of them made their way to the Shadow Peak Pack's main gathering hall, a massive timber structure with carved wolves along the beams and a roaring fire in the center pit. Pack members of all ranks filled the space. Food was laid out on long tables, roasted meats, fresh bread, autumn vegetables, and sweet cakes. Caleb's classmates ran wild, laughing and playing. Music hummed in the background, drums and strings, the traditional sounds of wolf gatherings. Cade kept his distance at first, letting Caleb bask in the attention. But eventually, he made his way to Sarah, who sat at the edge of the room with a plate of food and a cup of spiced cider. You ever think about going back? He asked casually. To healing? She looked at him sideways. Not exactly light gathering conversation. He smiled. I've been thinking. I know this wolf, sharp, compassionate, saved my son's life in under 90 seconds. Doesn't scare easy. The kind of wolf who belongs in a healing center. Not serving tables. Sarah folded her napkin slowly. Cade. I'm not offering charity, he said firmly. Or a job. I'm saying if you ever wanted to go back, finish your training, I'd support that. No strings. Just belief. She looked at him for a long moment. That's a rare kind of offer. Not as rare as someone like you. Her walls softened just slightly. I'll think about it. He smiled. Good. At the end of the gathering, as the pups gathered for one final group photo, Caleb tugged on Sarah's sleeve. Can you stand next to me? Of course. As the camera clicked, Cade stood just behind them, hand resting gently on Caleb's shoulder. In that frozen moment, a boy, a father, an Omega who had once been a stranger, they looked like something whole. Not perfect. But real. And sometimes, Sarah thought, that was enough. Chapter 12. The silence in Cade's office was different now. It was no longer the silence of power, of private negotiations and calculated pauses. This was the silence of someone standing at a crossroad, haunted by old choices and frightened of new ones. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the territory that used to bow beneath him. The forests glittered under morning frost, but they felt cold now, distant. Behind him, Marcus spoke carefully. You're trending again, Alpha. Cade didn't turn. Why? Marcus exhaled, then slid a tablet onto his desk. Someone leaked information about Sarah's incomplete healer training. They're questioning her credentials. Calling her an opportunist. Saying she manipulated you through Caleb. Cade turned slowly, his wolf rising dangerously close to the surface. Who? The article traces back to Councilwoman Ruth Langston. She's been vocal about concerns regarding an Omega's influence over the Alpha King. Cade's jaw tightened. Ruth Langston, a powerful she-wolf from one of the oldest bloodlines in the territory. She'd been on the Pack Council for 15 years and had never hidden her traditionalist views. What exactly is she saying? Cade asked, voice low and dangerous. Marcus hesitated. That Sarah is overstepping her rank. That her presence in your home, around Caleb, at pack gatherings, it's inappropriate. She's calling for a formal inquiry. An inquiry into what? Into whether Sarah used undue influence to gain access to the Alpha bloodline. Whether she's, Marcus paused, uncomfortable. Whether she's angling to become Luna. Cade's eyes flashed silver. That's insane. Is it? Marcus asked quietly. Alpha, I'm not saying I agree with Ruth. But you have to see how this looks. An Omega with incomplete training diagnoses your son, correctly, yes, but then becomes a fixture in your life. At your home. At pack events. People are talking. Let them talk, Cade growled. It's not just talk anymore. 3 council members are backing Ruth's inquiry. If she gets 5, it becomes official pack business. Cade turned back to the window, his hands clenched into fists. They're trying to discredit her because she doesn't fit their idea of who should have a voice. Maybe, Marcus said. But they're also protecting tradition. Alpha-Omega bonds are rare, Cade. And controversial. The power imbalance. There's no bond, Cade interrupted sharply. We're not mated. Marcus gave him a long look. Your wolf says otherwise. I can smell it on you. So can half the pack. Cade said nothing. You need to make a choice, Marcus continued. Either distance yourself from her, publicly, or claim her. Officially. There's no middle ground anymore. Meanwhile, Sarah stood in the modest exam room of the Glenwood Free Clinic, a clipboard pressed to her chest. She'd been volunteering here since Caleb's recovery, translating for patients, assisting with basic care, doing what she could with the training she had. But today, the head healer, Dr. Nessa Gray, had called her into the office. "Sit," Nessa said, gesturing to a chair. Sarah sat slowly, tension coiling in her stomach. Nessa was in her 60s, a no-nonsense wolf with silver-streaked hair and sharp amber eyes. She'd been a healer for 40 years and commanded respect across 3 territories. "I'm going to be blunt," Nessa said. "There's a formal inquiry being launched. Against you." Sarah's heart sank. "What kind of inquiry?" "The Pack Council wants to review your actions regarding Caleb Mercer. They're questioning whether you overstepped your bounds, whether you had the credentials or authority to make a medical assessment." "I saved his life," Sarah said, voice tight. "I know," Nessa said. "And so does every competent healer in this territory. But that doesn't matter to wolves like Ruth Langston. She doesn't care about what you did. She cares about what you are." "An Omega," Sarah said bitterly. Nessa nodded. "An Omega who's getting too close to the Alpha King. That terrifies people like her. Because if you can rise, it means the old rules don't matter anymore." Sarah looked down at her hands. "What happens if the inquiry moves forward?" "They'll review your training records. Question witnesses. Probably try to paint you as reckless or manipulative." Nessa leaned forward. "But here's what they won't be able to deny, you were right. Caleb had moya disease. Without intervention, he would have died or suffered permanent brain damage. You saw what trained healers missed. Will that be enough?" Sarah asked quietly. Nessa's expression softened. "In a fair system? Yes. But this isn't about fairness. It's about power." That evening, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, staring at the letter that had been delivered an hour ago. Notice of formal inquiry. Subject: Sarah Winters. Allegation: unauthorized medical intervention and undue influence over Alpha bloodline. Her hands trembled as she read it. A knock came at the door. She opened it to find Cade standing there, rain dripping from his jacket, his silver eyes burning with barely controlled rage. "I just heard," he said. Sarah stepped aside, and he walked in, pacing like a caged wolf. "This is Ruth's doing," he said. "She's trying to destroy you because she can't control me." "Cade." "No," he interrupted, turning to face her. "This is my fault. I should have shut this down the moment it started. I should have." "You should have what?" Sarah asked, voice sharp. "Publicly claimed me? Announced to the pack that the Alpha King is bonding with a low-rank Omega? That would only make it worse." "Then what do you want me to do?" he asked, frustration cracking through. "Stand by and watch them tear you apart?" "I want you to let me fight my own battles," she said firmly. "I've been doing it my whole life." "You shouldn't have to," Cade said, stepping closer. "Not anymore." The air between them crackled with tension, anger, fear, and something deeper. Something neither of them could deny anymore. "Cade," Sarah said quietly. "What are we doing?" He looked at her, and for the first time, his walls came down completely. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I can't lose you. Not after everything. Not when my wolf is screaming that you're..." He stopped. "That I'm what?" Sarah whispered. Cade's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Mine." The word hung in the air between them, heavy, undeniable, terrifying. Sarah's breath caught. The moon goddess doesn't choose bonds like this. Not between an Alpha King and an Omega. "Then maybe," Cade said, stepping closer until there was barely any space between them, "the moon goddess is tired of the old rules too." Chapter 13. The rain had stopped by the time Sarah and Cade stood facing each other in the small living room of her apartment. The silence was deafening, filled with everything they'd been avoiding for weeks. "Say it again," Sarah whispered. Cade's silver eyes held hers. "You're mine." My wolf knows it. I've known it since the hospital. Maybe even before. Mate bonds don't work like this, Sarah said, but her voice wavered. They're supposed to be immediate. Obvious. Not gradual. Maybe they are for some, Cade said. But ours wasn't built on instinct alone. It was built on trust. On seeing each other when no one else did. Sarah closed her eyes, her own wolf stirring, confirming what she'd been trying to deny. She'd felt it too. The pull. The way her wolf settled in his presence. The way Caleb smelled like home. This will destroy everything, she said. Your reputation. Your standing with the council. Caleb's future. Caleb adores you, Cade interrupted. And my reputation means nothing if I lose what actually matters. You don't understand what you're asking, Sarah said, voice breaking. If you claim me, if we complete this bond, every wolf in the territory will question your judgment. They'll say I manipulated you. That I used Caleb to get close to you. That I'm not worthy. Stop, Cade said firmly. He reached out, cupping her face gently. You are the strongest wolf I've ever known. Rank means nothing compared to character. And if the council can't see that, then maybe it's time for new leadership. Sarah's breath hitched. You'd challenge the council? For me? I'd burn the whole system down for you, he said simply. But I won't do any of it without your consent. This bond, it only works if you want it to. Sarah looked up at him, tears sliding down her cheeks. I'm terrified. So am I, Cade admitted. But I've learned something from you. Sometimes the scariest thing is also the right thing. She laughed through her tears. You're using my own words against me. I learned from the best. For a long moment, they just stood there, two wolves from completely different worlds, brought together by a sick child and a series of impossible choices. If we do this, Sarah said slowly, we do it right. No hiding. No half measures. We face the council together. Cade nodded. Together. And if they reject the bond? His eyes flashed with alpha dominance. Then I'll remind them that the Alpha King doesn't ask for permission. Sarah smiled despite herself. That's the Cade I first met. He never left, Cade said. He just learned when to listen. She reached up, her hand covering his on her cheek. My wolf says yes. She's been saying yes for weeks. And you? Cade asked quietly. What does Sarah say? She took a deep breath. Sarah says, let's show them what a real Luna looks like. Cade's answering smile was fierce and full of promise. He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. When their lips met, the bond snapped into place like lightning, sharp, undeniable, and absolutely right. Sarah gasped as she felt it, the golden thread connecting her wolf to his, the Alpha King's power wrapping around her like a protective embrace, and beneath it all, Caleb's small presence, already woven into the fabric of their bond. A family. A pack. A future. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. The council meets in 3 days, Cade said. That's when we announce it. Sarah nodded. 3 days. You ready for war? He asked with a slight smirk. She matched his smile with one of her own, sharp and unafraid. I've been ready my whole life. Chapter 14. The council chamber was ancient, carved from mountain stone with wolves etched into every pillar. Torches burned in iron sconces along the walls, and the circular table at the center could seat 20. Today, only 12 wolves sat there. The most powerful alphas, betas, and elders in the territory. At the head sat Ruth Langston, her steel-gray hair pulled back, her expression carved from ice. Cade entered with Sarah at his side, not behind him, not following meekly, but beside him as an equal. The room went silent. Alpha Mercer, Ruth said coolly. This is a closed council session. Omegas are not permitted unless summoned as witnesses. She's not here as a witness, Cade said, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. She's here as my mate. The room erupted. Voices overlapped, shock, outrage, disbelief. Ruth stood slowly. You cannot be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life, Cade said. An Alpha King and an Omega, one of the elder wolves sputtered. It's unprecedented. The power imbalance alone is no different than any other mate bond, Sarah interrupted, her voice steady. Unless you're suggesting that the moon goddess makes mistakes. Several wolves shifted uncomfortably. Ruth's eyes narrowed. The moon goddess works through order. Through tradition. You are a healer's apprentice who never completed her training. You have no rank, no bloodline, no. I have the Alpha King's trust, Sarah said firmly. I have his son's love. And I have the bond the moon goddess herself forged. If that's not enough for this council, then perhaps this council needs to examine what it truly values. Insolent, Ruth began. Enough, Cade said, his alpha command rolling through the room like thunder. Every wolf, even Ruth, felt the compulsion to submit. All except Sarah, protected by their bond. I didn't come here to ask permission, Cade continued. I came to inform you. Sarah Winters is my mate. She will be Luna of this pack. And anyone who challenges that challenges me directly. This will tear the pack apart, Ruth said coldly. No, a voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned. Caleb stood there, dressed in his formal clothes, flanked by Marcus. Caleb? Cade said, startled. You're supposed to be. I know, Caleb said, walking forward with as much confidence as a 5-year-old could muster. But I heard what was happening. And I have something to say. Ruth looked ready to object, but Cade nodded. Let him speak. Caleb walked to the center of the circle, looking tiny beneath the massive carved wolves. Miss Sarah saved my life, he said clearly. When no one else saw that I was sick, she did. When everyone said she was wrong, she wasn't. And when my dad didn't listen, she didn't give up. He looked around at the council. Isn't that what leaders are supposed to do? See things other people miss? Fight for what's right even when it's hard? Several council members looked away, shame touching their features. My mom left because she said Dad cared more about being alpha than being family, Caleb continued, his voice wobbling slightly. But Miss Sarah makes him remember that being strong means caring about people. Not just ruling them. He turned to Ruth. You're mad because she's Omega. But Shadow, my wolf, says rank doesn't matter. Heart does. And Miss Sarah has the biggest heart of anyone I know. The room was utterly silent. Caleb walked over to Sarah and took her hand. She's my family now. And if you make her leave, you're saying family doesn't matter. That rules matter more than people. He looked up at his father. That's not the kind of alpha I want to be. Cade's eyes burned with pride, and tears. Ruth sat down slowly, the fight draining from her expression. One of the elder wolves, a female alpha named Miriam, stood. The boy speaks wisdom beyond his years. She looked at Sarah. I've heard the testimony from Dr. Reeves. From the healers at Silverpine. You did save the alpha heir's life. That alone grants you honor in this pack. Another wolf stood. I second recognizing the bond. Then another. And another. By the time the votes were counted, only 3 wolves, including Ruth, had opposed. The rest had accepted. Cade looked at Sarah, and she saw it in his eyes. We did it. Then it's settled, Miriam said formally. Sarah Winters is recognized as mate to Alpha King Cade Mercer. The bonding ceremony will be held at the next full moon. That night, as they stood on the balcony of Cade's penthouse, looking out over the sleeping territory, Sarah finally let herself breathe. I can't believe that actually worked, she said. You were magnificent, Cade said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Caleb was right. You do have the biggest heart. She leaned back against him. He's an incredible kid. He gets it from his Luna, Cade murmured against her neck. Sarah smiled. I'm not Luna yet. You've been Luna since the moment you refused to back down in that dining hall, Cade said. Everything else is just ceremony. She turned in his arms. Are you sure about this? Really sure? Because once we complete the bond. He kissed her, cutting off her doubts. When he pulled back, his eyes were molten silver. I've never been more sure of anything. You're mine, Sarah. And I'm yours. Let the whole world know it. Even Ruth, she teased. Especially Ruth, he said with a grin. They stood there together as the moon rose over the mountains, full and bright, as if the moon goddess herself was giving her blessing. Epilogue, 6 months later. The Shadow Peak Pack Gathering Hall was filled with laughter and music. The annual spring festival was in full swing, pups running wild, elders sharing stories by the fire, young wolves dancing under strings of lights. At the head table sat Luna Sarah Mercer, dressed in flowing green robes embroidered with silver wolves. Her Luna mark, a crescent moon, now adorned her neck, visible and proud. Beside her, Alpha King Cade watched his mate with undisguised adoration. And between them, Caleb, now 6 years old, healthy and strong, told animated stories to a group of younger pups about the time Miss Sarah became Luna. She walked right into the council, Caleb said dramatically, and told them that the moon goddess doesn't make mistakes. The pups gasped appropriately. Sarah smiled, catching Cade's eye. He reached over and took her hand, squeezing gently. Any regrets, he murmured. She looked around, at the pack that had once dismissed her, now celebrating under her leadership. At the healing center she'd helped establish, offering free care to wolves of all ranks. At the scholarship fund in Malik's name, already supporting 3 young Omega healers. And most of all, at the boy who called her Mom now, and the Alpha who'd learned that true strength meant knowing when to listen. Not a single one, she said. Across the hall, even Ruth Langston raised her glass, a begrudging acknowledgement of a Luna who'd earned her place not through bloodline, but through courage. The music swelled. Cade stood, offering Sarah his hand. Dance with me, Luna. She took it. Always, Alpha. As they moved to the center of the hall, the pack parted, watching their leaders with pride and respect. Caleb hooped from the sidelines. That's my mom and dad. And Shadow, Caleb's wolf, now strong and healthy, howled in agreement. Under the full moon, the Shadow Peak Pack celebrated not just spring, but renewal. Because sometimes the greatest strength comes from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the ones the world overlooks are exactly the ones the moon goddess chooses. And sometimes, a waitress with nothing but courage and a good heart can become the Luna a pack never knew it needed. The end. Thank you for listening to this story. Like, share and subscribe for more.